If you recall from when we was talking about Ezra, when we was going through Ezra, right? Ezra speaks on how the people got back to the land and was rebuilding the temple, right? That's mainly what Ezra is about. There's also a reckoning of genealogies and, bringing the people back to the covenant. And we see that here in Nehemiah as well. But Nehemiah is more about building the wall because he got there a little late. He said, okay, the temple's already built, but the wall is looking raggedy. Let's build up the wall. So that's what we read about last week. Let's get into it. All right. Nehemiah 7, starting with verse 1. Now it came to pass when the wall was built, and I had set up the doors, and the porters, and the singers, and the Levites were appointed, that I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the ruler of the palace, charge over Jerusalem. For he was a faithful man, and feared God above many. And I said unto them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun be hot. And while they stand by, let them shut the doors and bar them and appoint watches of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, everyone in his watch, and everyone to be over against his house. So why is it that he's doing this? That he's saying, look, set up the watchmen, make sure they're very attentive, and don't even open the gates to the city until it's very hot in the day. Because while the temple was being built and while the wall was being built, all the surrounding heathen nations, all the surrounding neighboring nations were trying to prevent the rebuilding of Jerusalem. That's what they were trying to do. They even come through, started attacking people. So in self-defense, as we read last week, Nehemiah set up security. Essentially. So that's what he's doing here as well. He's securing the city. He's making sure that the city is safe. All right. Verse 4. Now the city was large and great, but the people were few therein, and the houses were not builded. Right. So they built the temple and they built the wall, but a lot of the houses are still destroyed. A lot of the people that live there don't have houses yet. And there's not even very many people who live there, right? Because a lot of the Jews who were freed in Babylon decided to stay in Babylon and wherever else they were. They said, look, we done built a life here in the land of our captivity. We don't want to go back. We want to stay here. But some did go back, and it tells you the number down here. All right. Verse 5, and my God put into my heart to gather the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them which came up at the first, and found written therein. All right, so he found the register of the genealogy of those who came back initially. This is what you read about in Ezra 2. All right, as it says right up here. It's the same genealogy, so we're not going to get into it. All these names, and it lists the number of the people in the families, right? Then you have the priests, and then you have the Levites. Up here, it's going into different families of, Zerubbabel, we know, came from Judah. So that's mainly Judites right there. It can be assumed that Asgad is of the tribe of Gad. Didn't have to be necessarily Asgad, may mean something different, but there was a remnant of Northern Kingdom in here, not much. And next week we may actually go into what Northern Kingdom was doing at the time. Even we may detour a bit. We'll see how things go. But this is mainly going into the Judite families that came back, Benjamite families as well. But then you have the priests, you have the Levites. All right. Then you have the Nethinims. The Nethinims are just people who dedicated themselves to serving in the temple during the days of Solomon. All right. And those families the fathers raised their children to be, the temple servants, as it says right here. That's all Nethinims means. All right. That's all those different families. They could have been of any tribe. All right. To dedicate themselves to the temple. It didn't really matter which tribe you were. You just had to be clean in the Levitical sense, as far as you read about all that in Leviticus. All right. Obviously you can't eat any unclean foods. Nobody can do that as far as the laws of God. But you also, like, for example, to go into the holiest of places, you had to like wash yourself with water, and you couldn't have like just ejaculated, for example. You had to wash yourself and wait till the evening to go in there. You if you would have touched any dead animal, you would have had to wash yourself with water and wait until the evening to go back to work. So like it's Levitical cleanliness like that. The children of Solomon's servants, right? So again, people who dedicated themselves to King Solomon and serving him in his house. Again, could have been of any tribe, but it tells you the families, right? Verse 60, all the Nethinims and the children of Solomon's servants were 392, right? So it wasn't very many people, but it was still, families of people. Verse 61, and these were they which went up also from Tel Melah and Tel Harashah, Sherub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not show their father's house, nor their seed, whether they were of Israel. The children of Deliah, the children of Tobiah, the children of Nekoda, 642. So it was over 600 people who came back saying, look, we're Israelites. But they couldn't prove their lineages. They were still reckoned here, but it was also made note that, they couldn't prove their lineage. The thing about that today, and we read in the New Testament where Paul said it's not about endless genealogies. All right. So there's a lot of people who can't reckon the genealogy like past maybe themselves, right? So a lot of people who don't know their dad these days, right? And even further back, a lot of people who don't know their granddad, a lot of people who don't know their great granddad, their great great granddad. But the point here is that we all did at one point. The Israelites kept record of those things to understand our culture and our heritage. All right, but obviously, we were discontinued from our heritage, according to the curses of Deuteronomy 28, according to the prophecy in Jeremiah 17:4. All right, so we don't have this anymore. We don't have records like this anymore, like what they used to keep. All right. In verse 63, we see some more of this. And of the priests, the children of Habiah, the children of Koz, the children of Barzillai, which took one of the daughters of Barzillai, the Gileadite to wife, and was called after their name. These sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but it was not found. Therefore were they, as polluted, put from the priesthood, right? So he said, look, you can't even be a priest if you can't reckon your genealogy from Aaron, all right? And that was the law under the old covenant. Of course, as I just mentioned, in the new covenant, it's not about endless genealogy. And the Tershatha said unto them that they should not eat of the most holy things till there stood up a priest with Urim and Thummim. All right, Urim and Thummim is essentially like a probability, not exactly dice, not exactly a magic 8-ball, but similar to that. All right, similar to that, where it was a probability type thing where, let's say it's dice. It wasn't dice. It was something similar, though. Let's say it's dice, where you roll the dice, and whatever answer you get from the dice, it must be from God, because God determines all things. He determines all probability. He's going to give you whatever answer is correct. So that's essentially what Urim and Thummim was. It was a probability type reckoning device. And the Tershatha here is another word for governor, and that's Nehemiah. All right, we're going to read that as we keep going. All right. Verse 66, the whole congregation together was 42,300, and 60. All right. So 42,360 was how many people that came back to the land. All right. That wasn't all the Israelites. That was just the people who came back to the land. As you see here, it's the same thing we read in Ezra 2. So I'm not going to read in all this. Again, this is basically copy paste from Ezra 2. We've read this before. All right. So verse 73, so the priests and the Levites and the porters and the singers and some of the people and the Nethinims and all Israel dwelt in their cities. And when the 7th month came, the children of Israel were in their cities. All right. So all the people who came back to Israel were in their cities by the 7th month of this particular year. All right. Now we're getting into the 8th month, essentially. Nehemiah 8. No, not the 8th month. Excuse me. The 7th month when the feast days are. Excuse me. This is Nehemiah 8. Nehemiah 8, starting with verse 1. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate. And they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded to Israel. Excuse me, still recovering from some illness I had this past week. So please forgive me. Sinuses, all that kind of stuff. All right. So the people came to Ezra because they knew that he was a prophet of the Lord, and they said, bring us the Bible. Bring it out. That's what they said to him. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both the men and women, and all that could hear with understanding, upon the first day of the 7th month. Now, the first day of the 7th month is known as a feast unto the Lord. Not only is it the new moon, but it's the memorial blowing of trumpets. All right, that's the specific feast day that it is. It's on the new moon of the 7th month. The 7th moon, some might say. And he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday, before the men and the women and those that could understand. And the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. So they weren't just sitting there like, hey, what you gonna eat after this is done? They were listening. They were ready to hear and to understand the word of God. All right. And by the way, the 7th month is not July. That's not what it is. In the Bible, it's like September. That's how they get the term septum. All right. Or September. It's around that time. All right. That's how you get September. October is not the 10th month. It's the 8th month. All right. November is the 9th month. So you can understand. But of course, in the Bible, it's by the moons. It's not by Gregorian calendar. Verse 4. And Ezra the scribe stood upon a pulpit of wood, which they had made for the purpose, right? So he can stand and be elevated so that all the people could see him, right? So that tells you right there, Ezra was not a very tall guy, all right? But he was a prophet of the Lord, and he had this pulpit made so he could stand on it and the people could hear him, all right? Or see him while he's teaching and hear him. All right. Let's see. Which they had made for the purpose. And beside him stood Mattathiah and Shema and Ananiah and Urijah and Hilkiah and Maaseiah on his right hand, and on his left hand Pedaiah and Mishael and Malchiah and Hashum and Hashbaddanah, Zechariah and Meshullam. Right. So he had brothers next to him on either side. All right. And Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. Right. So the pulpit, obviously, it's like a stage type thing, and he's elevated. He's above all the people. And when he opened it, the people stood up because they're like trying to see, oh, what's he reading from, right? And Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, with lifting up their hands and bowed their heads and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. Also, Jeshua and Bani and Sherebiah, Jamin, Akub, Shabbatai, Hodijah, Maaseiah, Kalida, Azariah, Jozabad, Hanan, Peliah, and the Levites caused the people to understand the law, right? So as Ezra was reading and going through things, there were men going throughout the crowd saying, oh, you understand what he's talking about? You have any questions? And they were making sure that the people understood, all right, answering questions, all right? And the people stood in their place. So they read in the book of the law, So they read in the book in the law of God distinctly and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading. All right. So not only did they read the Bible, they said, okay, here's how you apply it. All right. Verse 9, and Nehemiah, which is the Tershatha, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites that taught the people, said unto all the people, this day is holy unto the Lord your God. Mourn not, nor weep. For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law, because it convicted them in their spirit. They said, dang, I ain't doing none of that. I've been sinning against God. I didn't even know it. So now they feel that sorrow to repentance. So now, once they cast down those imaginations against God, they lifted the people up. They built them up in the spirit. All right. They said, look, don't mourn, don't weep. It's a feast day today. Let's be joyful and glad unto the Lord. All right. Verse 10. Then he said unto them, go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto our Lord. Neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. You see that right there? So happiness in serving God is where true power lies, is where true strength lies. All right. Is where true strength is, I should say, because lies, can be misinterpreted. All right. So the Levites stilled all the people, saying, hold your peace, for the day is holy, neither be ye grieved. All right. And all the people went their way to eat and to drink and to send portions. When portions is like gifts or like plates, you know what I mean? And plates is in like plates of food, and to make great mirth, because they had understood the words that were declared unto them. All right. So they understood. They said, yeah, today is a good day. Today is a holy day that we should be celebrating. All right. Verse 13. And on the second day were gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priests and the Levites, unto Ezra the scribe, even to understand the words of the law. So they all came back. They all came back the next day and said, please teach us more. Verse 14. And they found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. All right, so that's the Feast of Tabernacles, also called the Feast of Ingathering or the Feast of Booths. All right. Booths is like tents. All right. And that they should publish and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, go forth into the mount and fetch olive branches and pine branches and myrtle branches and palm branches and branches of thick trees to make booths, as it is written. Right. So they built their tents out of the tree limbs. All right. So the people went forth and brought them and made themselves booths, every one upon the roof of his house, and in their courts, and in the courts of the house of God, and in the street of the water gate, and in the street of the gate of Ephraim. Right. So generally, when you think of tents and making tents, you think of, they must be going to a campsite outside the city. They said, no, we'll make it on our house. As long as we're doing what God commanded, we'll make it right here in the street. As long as we're doing what God commanded, it's all right. You don't have to go, to the ends of the earth. You just have to do what God says to do. All right. Street of the gate of Ephraim, verse 17. And all the congregation of them that were come again out of the captivity made booths and sat under the booths. For since the days of Jeshua the son of Nun, right, that's Joshua that you read about after Deuteronomy, unto that day had not the children of Israel done so, right? Because you read about Feast of Tabernacles at other times in the scriptures, but never do you read much about the booths being made, historically, I mean. Of course, it was a commandment, but you don't read about it being as great as this feast was, all right? And there was very great gladness. Also, day by day, from the first day unto the last day, he read in the book of the law of God. So he did a lesson every day. All right. And they kept the feast 7 days. And on the 8th day was a solemn assembly, according unto the manner, like what the law says to do. All right. So that's a great example of the Feast of Tabernacles that'll be coming later on this year. It's after the summer. It's usually around September, sometimes early October, but usually in September. All right. Excuse me. Nehemiah 9, starting with verse 1. Now in the 24th day of this month, the children of Israel were assembled with fasting and with sackcloth and earth upon them. And the seed of Israel separated themselves from all strangers and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. Right. So now we're getting into the same history that we read about in Ezra. In Ezra 9, or chapter 9, and Ezra chapter 10. All right. Where a lot of these people who did not, who grew up in these other lands, grew up in captivity, they married women of the other nations. All right. And then they got back to the land, and then they're like, dang, I didn't know that was against the laws of God. So then they said, okay, we got to do what God said to do and separate from them. All right. Verse 3, and they stood up in their place and read in the book of the law of the Lord their God 1/4 part of the day, and another 4th part they confessed and worshiped the Lord their God. So say right here, the day is like 12 hours and the night is 12 hours. The 4th part of the day would be like 3 hours. They had a lesson for 3 hours, and then they confessed their sins and had another worship session for another 3 hours. All right. Then stood up upon the stairs of the Levites Jeshua and Bani, Kadmiel, Shebaniah, Buni, Sherebiah, Bani, and Chenani, and cry with a loud voice unto the Lord their God. Then the Levites, Jeshua and Kadmiel, Bani, Hashabaniah, Sherebiah, Hodijah, Shebaniah, and Pethahiah said, stand up and bless the Lord your God forever and ever, and blessed be thy glorious name, which is exalted above all blessing and praise. And normally we don't read prayers and prophecy, but in this is just recalling the history. All the history that we've read before, it's just summarizing it. So we'll read this so you can basically be caught up. Even if you haven't seen other Bible History 101s, you'll be able to understand all the history that we've been through just by reading Nehemiah chapter 9. All right, so we're going to go ahead and read this. All right, verse 6. Thou, even thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all things that are therein, the seas and all that is therein, and thou preservest them all. And the host of heaven worshipeth thee. All right, so when he says, you have made the heaven of heavens goes into like space with all their host. That's like the sun, moon, and stars, the earth and all that is therein, the seas, and thou preservest them all, and the host of heaven. So that would be like the armies in heaven. That's what host means. All right. Worshipeth thee. All right. Thou art the Lord, the God, who didst choose Abram and brought him forth out of Ur of the Chaldees, and gavest him the name of Abraham, and foundest his heart faithful before thee, and madest a covenant with him to give the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Jebusites, and the Girgashites, to give it, I say, to his seed, and hast performed thy words, for thou art righteous. So they're literally living in that prophecy, because they just returned to the land that was promised to Abram. All right. And gave us him the name Abraham, of course, and did see the affliction of our fathers in Egypt, and heard us their cry by the Red Sea, and showed signs and wonders upon Pharaoh and on all his servants and on all the people of his land, for thou knewest that they dealt proudly against them. So didst thou get thee a name, as it is this day, right? Because everybody talks about the story of the Exodus. All right, even DreamWorks made a movie about it, all right, called The Prince of Egypt. And thou didst divide the sea before them, so that they went through the midst of the sea on the dry land. And their persecutors thou threwest into the deeps, as a stone into the mighty waters. Moreover, thou leddest them in the day by a cloudy pillar, and in the night by a pillar of fire, to give them light in the way wherein they should go. Thou camest down also upon Mount Sinai, and spakest with them from heaven, and gavest them right judgments and true laws, good statutes and commandments, and madest known unto them thy holy Sabbath, and commandest them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant, and gave them bread from heaven for their hunger, and brought forth water for them out of the rock for their thirst, and promised them that they should go in to possess the land which thou hast sworn to give them. But they and our fathers dealt proudly, and hardened their necks, and hearkened not to thy commandments. Excuse me. So if you recall, at the beginning of Bible History 101, we touched slightly, we touched very briefly on the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Didn't really go through all their history. And we skipped over the Exodus as well, because in the Exodus, when you read Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, it's mostly about the laws of God. Some of it is history, but the 40 years throughout the wilderness is just exactly what we're reading here. Verse 17, and refused to obey, neither were mindful of thy wonders that thou didst among them, but hardened their necks, and in their rebellion appointed a captain to return to their bondage. But thou art a God ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and forsook them not. Right? So this is basically what it was, that the people in the wilderness were wicked and evil and wanted to go back to captivity, wanted to go back to Egypt because they didn't have faith in God. All right? So then God would punish them for their sins, but not entirely, just enough to let them know, look, y'all are sinning, y'all are going off, and y'all are breaking my covenant that we just made. All right. And then God would forgive them and not wipe them out entirely like what they deserved until that generation showed that they were not going to follow God. So he said, I'm gonna wait till y'all die. That's what the 40 years in the wilderness was about. It doesn't take 40 years to walk from Egypt to the land of Israel. He said, all right, this generation got to go. So y'all just got to stay in the desert till this generation dies. And your kids, I'm gonna give the land to your kids. And that's what ended up happening. All right. Yet thou and thy manifold mercies. No, excuse me. Verse 18. I don't want to skip that. Yea, when they had made them a molten calf and said, this is thy God that brought thee up out of Egypt and had wrought great provocations, yet thou and thy manifold mercies forsook them not in the wilderness. The pillar of the cloud departed not from them by day to lead them in the way, neither the pillar of fire by night to show them light and the way wherein they should go. And again, Paul let us know, and I believe it's 1 Corinthians 10, he let us know that the person who was flying that pillar was Christ. All right. That's the that rock that led them, by the way, was Christ. All right. Verse 20. Excuse me. Thou gavest also thy good spirit to instruct them, and withheldest not thy manna from their mouth, and gavest them water for their thirst. Yea, 40 years didst thou sustain them in the wilderness, so that they lack nothing. Their clothes wax not old, and their feet swell not. You see that right there? So even the generation that was wicked, their clothes didn't even wither. Because you got to think, in the 40 years, and if you even leave your clothes on for like, say, a few months, which is, crazy to even think of such a thing, they'll start to like tear and wither away. Right? But that's not what happened. That's not what happened to these people. God preserved their clothes even. All right. It said, and their feet swelled. Excuse me. Their feet swelled not. Their feet didn't hurt. Right. Moreover, thou gavest them kingdoms and nations, and didst divide them into corners. So they possessed the land of Sihon, the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan. I believe that's Numbers 32, where Gad, Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh got the lands that were east of the Jordan. All right. And we ain't looked at a map in a while. Let me go ahead and pull that up just to show you what I'm talking about. Excuse me. The sinus drainage is really afflicting me, y'all. So just be patient with me. All right. I try not to cough into the mic, but it is what it is. So yeah, this is the lands that he's talking about. The land of Sihon, the land of Og, king of Bashan. Bashan is like up here. Bashan is up here. Gilead is down here, and Aroer, as you see, is right there. That's what the larger name for Reuben is also the land of Aroer. All right. All right. So let's get back. Their children also multiplied thou as the stars of heaven, and broughtest them into the land concerning which thou hast promised to their fathers that they should go in to possess it. So the children went in and possessed the land, and thou subduest before them the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, and gave them into their hands with their kings and the people of the land, that they might do with them as they would. Right? You read about that, or rather we read about that during the days of Joshua, in the book of Joshua, like at some of the first lessons of Bible History 101. And they took strong cities and a fat land, and possessed houses full of all goods, wells digged, vineyards and olive yards, and fruit trees in abundance. So they did eat and were filled and became fat, and delighted themselves in thy great goodness. Verse 26. Nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against thee, and cast thy law behind their backs, and slew thy prophets which testified against them, to turn them to thee. Excuse me. And they wrought great provocations. All right, so that's what you read about in the Judges. All right, we covered that history about the how there would be deliverance, how God would deliver the people from captivity, and then only but maybe a generation or so later, the people would start worshiping idols again, and so God would send them into another captivity. That was short, but each time the captivity got longer and longer and longer, and that's how we ended up going to Babylon for 70 years, and then all the way you fast forward 2,500 years later from the return of this captivity, and since we kept doing the same things, worshiping idols and following after the other nations, God sent us into this captivity for 400 years. All right, verse 27. Therefore, thou deliverest them into the hand of their enemies, who vexed them. And in the time of their trouble, when they cried unto thee, thou heardest them from heaven. And according to thy manifold mercies, thou gavest them saviors, who saved them out of the hands of their enemies. Right? So that's the Judges. All right. But after they had rest, they did evil again before thee. Therefore, leftest thou them in the hand of their enemies, so that they had the dominion over them. Yet when they returned and cried unto thee, thou heardest them from heaven, and many times didst thou deliver them according to thy mercies. All right, and that's what again we we covered that. That's what I just said. And testified against them, that thou mightest bring them again unto thy law. Yet they dealt proudly, and hearkened not unto thy commandments, but sinned against thy judgments. And the spirits still remain today. People still don't want to listen to God. Still don't want to do what the law says to do. Which, if a man do, he shall live in them. Right? Meaning you will live and not die if you keep God's commandments. That's how you get eternal life. And withdrew the shoulder, and hardened their neck, and would not hear. So when it says withdrew the shoulder, that's like somebody touching your shoulder and saying, brother, please listen. And you're like, get on it, get off me. Like that's somebody trying to, hey, calm down. I'm just trying to give you the love of God. Get off me. That's what it's going into. All right. Yet many years didst thou forbear them, and testified against them by thy spirit and thy prophets. Yet would they not give ear. Therefore gavest thou them into the hand of the people of the lands. All right, even as it is this day. Nevertheless, for thy great mercy's sake, thou didst not utterly consume them, nor forsake them, for thou art a gracious and merciful God. Right? So God hasn't wiped us out entirely. Excuse me. The so-called blacks, Latinos, and American Indians, he hasn't wiped us out entirely, yet we're still under persecution this day because we don't keep God's commandments. All right. Verse 32, now therefore, our God, the great, the mighty, and the terrible God, who keepeth covenant and mercy, let not all the trouble seem little before thee, that hath come upon us, on our kings, on our princes, and on our priests, and on our prophets, and on our fathers, and on all thy people, since the time of the kings of Assyria unto this day. Right? So the prophets here, the priests here, in the time period of the Persians, are saying, Lord, look, don't think of this as a light thing. I know a day unto you is as 1,000 years, but none of us live to see 1,000 years, right? our days are as but a shadow, right? It's like grass that you cut in the morning and it's gone by the evening, right? I'm referencing Psalms when I'm saying that. Verse 33, howbeit thou art just in all that is brought upon us, meaning God just did everything he said he was going to do. That's all God did. All God did was keep his word. He kept his end of the covenant. He kept his end of the agreement. He kept his end of the deal. We're the ones who didn't keep our end. We're the ones who told God, okay, yeah, we'll accept those terms of punishment, and we will accept those terms of punishment because we're going to do everything that you said to do and receive the blessings instead of the curses. But guess what? Most of our existence as a people, as the 12 tribes, have been under the curses and not the blessings. There were times when we had the blessings, right? Like during the days of Joshua, we had the blessings. God was with us. We had the blessings during the days of David and the early days of Solomon. We had the blessings, right? But most of our time throughout history has been under the curses. Excuse me. Howbeit, thou art just in all that is brought upon us, for thou hast done right, but we have done wickedly. Neither have our kings, our princes, our priests, nor our fathers kept thy law, nor hearkened unto thy commandments and thy testimonies, wherewith thou didst testify against them. For they have not served thee in their kingdom, and in thy great goodness that thou gavest them, and in the large and fat land which thou gavest before them, neither turned they from their wicked works. Behold, we are servants this day, and for the land that thou gavest unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it. They said, look, we're still subject to Persia. Even though we were able to come back to the land, we still got to serve Persia. All right. And it yieldeth much increase unto the kings whom thou hast set over us because of our sins. Also, they have dominion over our bodies and over our cattle at their pleasure, and we are in great distress. And because of all this, we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, Levites, and priests seal unto it. So the reason why they wrote all this down, we're about to read in the next chapter. All right. Now, those that sealed were Nehemiah, the Tirshatha, right? So Nehemiah, the governor, they made an agreement to say, look, we're going to come back to the laws of God. That's essentially what all that was amounting to, is we're writing an agreement to come back to the laws of God. And you had Nehemiah, the first one to sign it, the governor. All right. You have all these names. I'm not going to get into all these names, but notice this is just the heads of all the people. All right. This is the leaders of all the people. This is the rulers of all the people. All right. And the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the porters, the singers, the Nethinims, and all they that had separated themselves from the people of the lands unto the law of God, their wives, excuse me, their wives, their sons, and their daughters, everyone having knowledge and having understanding. They clave to their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and into an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and to do all the commandments of the Lord our Lord, and his judgments and his statutes. Right. So they essentially said, let's go back to the law of Moses. And again, I've been referencing it the whole time that that chapter right there, chapter 9 referenced it, the curses of Deuteronomy 28. When it says enter into a curse, that's what it's going into. It entered into Deuteronomy 28, essentially saying if we don't keep God's commandments, we'll be under a curse. Verse 30, and that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. All right, saying we will not mix with the other people like what we've been doing. And if the people of the land bring ware or any victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we would not buy it of them on the Sabbath or on the holy day, right? Because you're not supposed to buy or sell on holy days. No business transactions when you're supposed to be serving God. And that we would leave the 7th year and the exaction of every debt, right? That's what's called a land Sabbath, all right? And the exaction of every debt, forgiveness of debts, every 7th year. That's what that's going into. If your brother owes you something, if an Israelite owes you something, he still owes it to you after 7 years. You're not supposed to try to reckon that, verse 32. Also, we made the ordinances for us to charge ourselves yearly with the third part of a shekel for the service of the house of our God. So he said, look, we're going to pay for all the things that the temple needs as well. For the shewbread and for the continual meat offering and for the continual burnt offering of the Sabbaths, of the new moons, for the set feasts and for the holy things and for the sin offerings to make an atonement for Israel and for all the work of the house of our God. They said, look, we're not going to put all the onus on the priests. We know that they don't have any land, no way to make money. So we, all the people are going to pitch in to help pay for things that the temple needs. And we cast the lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people for the wood offering to bring it into the house of our God after the houses of our fathers at times appointed year by year to burn upon the altar of the Lord our God as it is written in the law. And to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all fruit of all trees year by year into the house of the Lord. Again, for the Levites who did not have land. Also, the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstlings of our herds and of our flocks to bring to the house of our God, unto the priests that minister in the house of our God. Right? So those sacrifices, some of them were just burnt and, the aroma would fill the temple. But a lot of the sacrifices were killed so that the priests could have food. That's what a lot of the sacrifices were about. And that we should bring the first fruits of our dough and our offerings and the fruit of all manner of trees, of wine and of oil, unto the priests, to the chambers of the house of our God, and the tithes of our ground unto the Levites, that the same Levites might have the tithes in all the cities of our tillage. So notice, when it's mentioned when it's mentioning tithes here, it didn't say that, we're going to give the Levites 10% of our money. They said, look, the first fruit of our trees, the first fruit of of our cattle, things like that, of wine and oil. That's what tithes were. Tithes were not about paying your pastor money. Like no New Testament preacher, no New Testament apostle ever took tithes. That's not what it's about. All right. The tithes were making sure that the Levites could eat food. That was what it was about, essentially, providing for the Levites, because again, they had no land. Their service was for the temple. Their service was for the Lord. All right. And the priest, the son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites when the Levites take tithes, and the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes into the house of our God, to the chambers, into the treasure house. So like the Levite would take in so much money, because there was supposed to be like a Levite in every community, essentially. There's supposed to be a Levite or more in every community. And that they would have their suburbs of a city, and the Levites would be instructors to the families of that city, right? And so obviously they would collect the tithes from the people, and then even the Levites would be tithed, and the Levite tithe would come to Jerusalem where the temple was, all right? For the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of the corn, of the new wine, and the oil unto the chambers. Where are the vessels of the sanctuary, and the priests that minister, and the porters, and the singers? And we will not forsake the house of our God. Understand that thing. We will not forsake the house of our God. Obviously, then that was physically talking about the temple. But these days, the house of our God is a spiritual thing, right? It's the church, all right? And the church is the people, not a particular place, all right? So let's go to chapter 11. All right. So the people made a covenant that they would serve God. All right. Nehemiah 11, starting with verse 1. And the rulers of the people dwelt at Jerusalem. The rest of the people also cast lots to bring 1 of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9 parts to dwell in other cities. So casting lots is more like rolling dice than Urim and Thummim. All right. So casting lots is like a 1-to-1 with rolling dice. That's basically what that is. All right. So it said, look, if you roll the number, if you say it's like a D10, right? Like a 10-sided dice. You roll if you roll a 1, then you got to move to Jerusalem. All right. There were people who moved willingly, but there also had to be more people because not enough people offered themselves willingly. And the people blessed all the men that willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem. All right. So, verse 3. Now these are the chief of the province that dwelt in Jerusalem, but in the cities of Judah dwelt everyone in his possession in their tents. To wit, Israel, the priests, and the Levites, and the Nethinims, and the children of Solomon's servants. And listen to this right here. And at Jerusalem dwelt certain of the children of Judah and of the children of Benjamin. And then it goes into the children of Judah, and then it goes into the sons of Benjamin, right? So what about the rest of the 12 tribes? What about the northern kingdom tribes? Where did they go? Because then it lists the priests and the Levites. Doesn't mention any northern kingdom tribes coming back fully. So where did the tribes go again? I'm convinced I am going to touch on that next week. And before we get into all the Greek stuff, we're gonna touch on the northern kingdom stuff next week as far as what happened to the northern kingdom during this time. We're going to touch on that next week. All right. So, we're not going to get into the names, but just know that in Ezra and Nehemiah is reckoned the genealogies of the men of that time. All right, which is around 400 into the 300s BC. All right, that's the time period. All right. So, and if you're looking for baby names, this is a good place for Hebrew baby names. Is Ezra and Nehemiah. Excuse me. But notice it does say this in verse 20, and the residue of Israel. So there was a residue of northern kingdom that was there, right? So that's how you get northern kingdom in the New Testament. Here a little, and here a little, and there a little. You had some northern kingdom there, some northern kingdom here, but it wasn't the full tribes. You just had individuals who decided they wanted to come back to serve the Lord. All right. And you had others who decided we're going to go somewhere else and serve the Lord. But again, that's for next week. All right. The residue of Israel, of the priests and the Levites, were in all the cities of Judah, everyone in his inheritance. All right, so they went back to the cities that they were from. Most of the people just went back to the cities where they were from, but Jerusalem was of the utmost importance because not only is it the capital, but it is where the temple is, and that's where they kept the Bible. That's where they kept all the holy things, was in the temple. So if the heathen were to attack the land, that's where they would go, Jerusalem. All right. That's what Babylon did. Babylon came in, destroyed, first destroyed the wall, of course, but then destroyed the temple, burnt up the Bible, did all that. All right. Excuse me. So yeah, again, this is just going into the names of the people. We're not necessarily going to touch into that. And we're not going to touch into all these names, but these are some of these names I'm going to point out because they are important. All right. It said, now these are the priests and the Levites that went up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua. So you go up and you see Ezra here. I don't think this is the same Jeremiah because that you read in the Bible, of course, because I'm fairly certain Jeremiah in his book never went into captivity because Babylon didn't take everyone into captivity. They left some poor people, and Jeremiah was poor, and I think he died in the land during that 70-year period. So I don't think that's the same Jeremiah. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's the same Jeremiah. All right. But that is the same Ezra. All right, so we'll jump down a little bit. Iddo, I'll mention him briefly because he's more down here, but then it goes into the Levites right here. Excuse me. And as it says right here, this is the high priest, the succession of the high priests. And Jeshua, and Jeshua begat Jehoiakim, and Joachim begat Eliashib. Eliashib begat Jehoiada, and Jehoiada begat Jonathan, and Jonathan begat Jaddua. So notice that Ezra was not a high priest. Ezra was a scribe, but everyone respected the fact that Ezra was a prophet of the Lord, and they respected the work that he was doing. So he didn't have to be the high priest to stand up and teach all the people, right? And again, we've spoken on Ezra before, but what Ezra was doing during this time period is he was going back and forth to gather people from Babylon and lead them back to the land. He was going back and forth. He made waves. There was waves of people returning, all right, because of Ezra. And while he was on his journeys, he received prophecies and visions of the Lord. That's what you read about in 2nd Esdras, sometimes called 4th Esdras, and the Apocrypha, all right, that the wicked Greeks tried to destroy entirely. All right, but verse 12. And in the days of Jehoiakim were priests, the chief of the fathers. So these, again, I don't think that's the same Jeremiah. It's the same one that we read earlier in the chapter, but I don't think it's the same that you read about in, that has his own book. But anyway, here's that Ezra. He had children. All right. Meshullam was his son. Of Iddo, and remember I referenced Iddo, Zechariah. So that is the prophet Zechariah that you read about in the scriptures that wrote his own book. All right. He was son of the prophet Iddo. All right. So let's keep jumping around. All right. The Levites, verse 22. The Levites in the days of Eliashib, Joiada, and Johanan, and Jaddua were recorded chief of the fathers, also of the priests, to the reign of Darius the Persian. And then it goes into the sons of Levi, where the sons of Levi, the chief of the fathers, were written in the book of the Chronicles, even until the days of Johanan, the son of Eliashib. All right. So again, we have the Chronicles. Okay, and the chief of the Levites, Hashabiah, Sherebiah, and Jeshua, the son of Kadmiel, with their brethren over against them, to praise and to give thanks, according to the commandment of David, the man of God, ward over against ward, right? So that would be everybody in their place. Everybody has their specific duties. Everybody has their roles to play, all right? It said Mattaniah and Bakbukiah, Obadiah, Meshullam, Talmon, and Akub were porters keeping the ward at the thresholds of the gates, right? So ward is like prison. But porters are like, in this case, it would be like prison guards, or sometimes it's used in a case like a bouncer, right? Like a doorman, all right? These were in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and in the days of Nehemiah the governor. And see, that's how we know the word Tershatha means governor, because Nehemiah was the Tershatha. And of Ezra the priest, the scribe. See, Ezra was a scribe. He wasn't the high priest, he was a scribe. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites out of all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to keep the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings and with singing, with cymbals, psalteries, and with harps, right? So when they built the wall, just like when they built the temple, they had a celebration, all right? They dedicated it. And the sons of the singers gathered themselves together both out of the plain country round about Jerusalem and from the villages of, Netophathi. Also from the house of Gilgal, and out of the fields of Geba and Osmaveth, for the singers had builded them villages round about Jerusalem, right? So just like the law ordained for the Levites to dwell in their suburbs around the cities, that's what the singers did as well. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves and purified the people and the gates and the wall. Then I brought up the princes of Judah upon the wall, and appointed 2 great companies of them that gave thanks, whereof one went on the right hand upon the wall toward the dung gate, and after them went Hoshea, and half of the princes of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, and Meshullam, Judah and Benjamin, and Shemaiah and Jeremiah, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets, namely Zechariah the son of Jonathan, and the son of Shemaiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micaiah, the son of Zakur, the son of Asaph, and his brethren Shemaiah, Azariel, Milalai, Gilalai, Mai, Nathaniel, and Judah, Hanani with the musical instruments of David, the man of God, and Ezra the scribe went before them. And see, that's what you'll notice of like when you read the Psalms, certain psalms are meant to be played on certain instruments. And there were all sorts of instruments made. You had like with your, even when you look at instruments today, you have your different classifications of instruments, right? You have your brass instruments, you have your stringed instruments, you have your woodwind instruments, you have your percussion instruments. We all had those things in Israel too. They just called them different things. And maybe they were shaped a little differently to make a specific noise, or had specific holes in them that you would play, like a flute or like an oboe or whatever the case. But different instruments for different noises. And they, again, if you read the Psalms, it'll say, some Psalms will be like upon, and then it would name a specific instrument, like upon Higgaion is like one of the instruments. All right. And at the fountain gate, which was over against them, they went up by the stairs of the city of David, at the going up of the wall above the house of David, even unto the water gate eastward. All right. So you had all the people, man, all the people there. And they were, filling up the city, filling up the temple area. All right, let me just make sure everything's going well. It appears to be. Well, that's showing the front. Let me make sure everything. It says I'm still live. Yeah, it says I'm still live. So Lord's will, everything's all right. All right. Where are we at? Verse 38. And the other company of them that gave thanks went over against them, and I after them, and the half of the people upon the wall, from beyond the tower of the furnaces, even unto the broad wall, and from above the gate of Ephraim, and above the old gate, and above the fish gate, and the tower of Hananeel, and the tower of Mea, even unto the sheep gate. And they stood still in the prison gate. So stood the two companies of them that gave thanks in the house of God, and I and the half of the rulers with me. So I mentioned this last week, but notice it's like the fish gate, the sheep gate, and things like that. There's one called the dung gate, one called the water gate. That's a certain type of substance, like a fish or a sheep, would come in at certain points, and obviously the dung would go out at that certain point. That's to prevent cross-contamination and cholera and things like that. That's to keep everything clean, keep everything holy. All right. Verse 41. And the priests Eliakim, Maaseiah, Miniamin, Micaiah, Elionai, Zechariah, Hananiah with trumpets, and Maaseiah and Shemaiah and Eleazar and Uzi and Jehohanan, and Malchijah and Elam and Ezer, and the singers sang loud with Jezrahiah, their overseer, right? So everyone's singing loud, having a great time, playing instruments. It's all a beautiful time that they're having here, all right? Also that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The wives also and the children rejoiced, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard even afar off, right? So the people who were a couple towns over, they were still like, what's going on over there? All right, they heard what was on and popping. They said, I got to go check that out. Verse 44. And at that time were some appointed over the chambers for the treasurers, or for the treasures, for the offerings, for the first fruits, and for the tithes, to gather them to gather them out of the fields of the cities, the portions of the law for the priests and Levites. For Judah rejoiced for the priests and for the Levites that waited. Right. So there's so much stuff coming in, they had to put some people over it. Right. Had to appoint some people over it. And both the singers and the porters kept the ward of their God, and the ward of the purification, according to the commandment of David and of Solomon his son, meaning kept their office, right? They did exactly what they were supposed to do. All right. For in the days of David and Asaph of old, there were chief of the singers and songs of praise and thanksgiving unto God. See, David established, families of singers, right? Asaph being one of them. All right, the family of Asaph and his children were good singers, so David appointed them to be the singers. All right, and all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah gave the portions of the singers and the porters every day his portion. And they sanctified holy things unto the Levites, and the Levites sanctified them unto the children of Aaron. Right, so Zerubbabel was one of the first ones back, and he was the governor during the days when they were building the temple. Nehemiah came, he was the governor during the days of the building of the wall. All right. But, everybody was, trying to get right during their days. Everyone was trying to practice repentance in their days while they were ruling over the land. All right. Nehemiah 13, starting with 1. On that day, they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever, right? So that's Deuteronomy 23. Because they met not the children of Israel with bread and with water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit, our God turned the curse into a blessing, right? You read about that in Numbers 23 and 24. Now it came to pass when they had heard the law that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude, right? Because there's always been people who want to join, right? Who want to piggyback on what the Israelites are doing, right? So in this case, you had Ammonites and Moabites. They said, "No, get out of here. No, we can't have y'all in the temple. We can't have y'all in the congregation." Verse 4. And before this, Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah. Tobiah was an Ammonite. And by the way, Ammonites and Moabites is Chinese, Japanese. That's who that is. All right. Moabites is the Chinese. Ammonites are the Japanese. All right. And he prepared for him a great chamber, where aforetime they laid the meat offerings, the frankincense, and the vessels, and the tithes of the corn, the new wine, and the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the offerings of the priests. But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, came I unto the king, right? So the 32nd year, I believe this is actually Artaxerxes the second. So came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king. So here you see, this is what everyone had to do at that time. Maybe not everyone, but this is what most had to do at that time, especially influential people like Nehemiah. They had to, and I've spoken on this before, they could come back to the land, but it was like their time off. They had to go back to work, and serve Persia, from time to time. All right. So that's what you have here. Nehemiah would ask for more days off. He would come back to the land to govern and to do righteousness, like build a wall and make sure the people are in order and all that kind of stuff. Then he'd have to go back after a little bit. All right. And I came to Jerusalem and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah, in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God, right? So Tobiah being an Ammonite and knowing the scriptures say that Ammonites can't even go into the congregation, much less in the temple of God. And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God with the meat offering and the frankincense. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled everyone to his field. Then contended I with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place, right? So Nehemiah, as soon as Nehemiah was gone, as soon as Nehemiah had to go, and visit Persia and answer to his, oppressors, essentially, you had the people just fell off immediately. The people who didn't have to return to Persia did not keep things in order. They fell off immediately and just started doing what they wanted to do, as opposed to what God said to do. Then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil unto the treasuries. And I made treasurers over the treasuries, Shelemiah the priest, and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites, Pedaiah. And next to them was Hanan, the son of Zakur, the son of Mattaniah, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute unto their brethren, right? So he said, look, I'm going to take these righteous men, and they're going to make sure everything's in order. I don't know what y'all been doing. Eliashib, I don't know what you've been up to, what y'all been doing, but y'all ain't doing what you're supposed to be doing, all right? I'm going to set up these righteous people who's going to do what they're supposed to do. Verse 14, remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for the offices thereof. Right? So Nehemiah is asking the Lord, hey, please remember me for the good things I've done, not for my sins. Please forgive my sins, but remember the good works that I've done for you, O Lord. Don't let this be done in vain. In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and lading asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. So all the people, they're just going about their business on the Sabbath, as opposed to keeping it holy like what God said to do. As soon as Nehemiah left, the people just went off. They fell off. What happened to all the people who were attentive to the law? They heard it, they heard the word, but would not do it. At least not in the absence of Nehemiah. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. You see that right there? So people don't even realize that you bring more wrath upon us by breaking the Sabbath day. And of course, Christianity tell you ain't got to keep the Sabbath no more. Why do you think that is? It's to keep you in sin so that you can stay under God's wrath and Christ's kingdom will not be established. Verse 19, and it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. Right. So he set up the bouncers. Right. So like the porters, if you want to use that word, that's the word that has been used. Right. So he set up the bouncers. He set up security at the gates. He said, don't let nobody in. All right, who wants to do business? So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them and said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. So Nehemiah wasn't playing around. Nehemiah was quick to throw hands. All right, he was not messing around. All right. He said, look, y'all come over here again, I'm gonna put the paws on you. All right. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves and that they should come and keep the gates. Excuse me. To sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. All right, so Nehemiah is listing his good works. All right, he said, look, the people tried to go off. I wouldn't let them go off. I love my people too much. I will not suffer sin upon them. All right. Notice he's not trying to put these people to death either. He's trying to call them to repentance. All right. Verse 23. In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and of Moab. So that's Africans, Japanese, and Chinese, right? Israelites mixing with these other nations. And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, right? So they couldn't speak Hebrew. They would speak in the language of each people, but according to the language of each people. And I contended with them and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, Ye shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves, right? So he's arguing with them, cursing them, right? And even slapping some of them. That's what smite means. Smite means to hit, right? He said, I had to hit a couple of them, right? He said, plucked off their hair, got into it. He was scrapping with some of them. But he made them swear that, hey, don't be doing this stuff, all right? Do what the Bible says to do, all right? Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin. You see that right there? So Solomon sinned by marrying the other nations. All right. So Nehemiah is saying, look, this is what made us fall in the first place. Why are y'all still doing this? Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God and marrying strange wives? You see right there? You see what God said about interracial marriage? He said it's a great evil to transgress against God whenever an Israelite marries somebody who's not an Israelite. And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore, I chased him from me. I mean, Nehemiah was not playing. Nehemiah was ready to throw hands with you, ready to scrap. Remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers, and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, the offices of the priests and Levites, everyone in his business. He said, look, I'm about my Father's business. I'm going to make sure that y'all have a part to play in that. Nehemiah said, look, I can't do it all by myself. I got to appoint y'all into certain sections, certain sectors of the Lord's business. And for the wood offering at times appointed, and for the first fruits, remember me, oh my God, for good. All right. So that last chapter got real heavy about about Nehemiah's life. Of course, we know that in the spirit of Christ, we should not be striking people. Nehemiah is not the perfect example, right? That's Christ. Christ was the perfect example. But the point is, Nehemiah was ready to stand for the laws of God, no matter what it came to. All right. And once we get into the Maccabean family, the books of the Maccabees in the Apocrypha, once we get into that history, you'll see what it's really like standing for the laws and the covenant of God, no matter what.